Welcome to Two Boys in a Book. These are nighttime readings from a mom and her two boys. Let's go on an adventure through reading. Chapter 7, An Unknown Species of Whale. Even though I was surprised by this unexpected fall, I still have a very clear memory of my sensations at the time. I was first of all dragged down to the depth of about 20 feet. I am a good swimmer, although I couldn't pretend to equal Byron or Edgar or Allan Poe, who were masters of the art, and this dive did not make me lose my head. Two strong kicks brought me back to the surface. My first thought was to try and find the frigate. Had the crew noticed my disappearance? Had the Abraham Lincoln come about? Was Commander Farragut putting a lifeboat to sea? Did I have a chance of being saved? I was surrounded by total darkness, but I could make out a vague black shape disappearing towards the east. Its riding light slowly fading as it got farther away. I felt I was done for. "Help! Help!" I cried as I swam desperately toward the Abraham Lincoln. My clothes began to get in the way. The water was making them stick to my body, paralyzing my movements. I was sinking. I was drowning. "Help!" was my last shout. My mouth filled with water, I struggled against being dragged down to the depths. Suddenly, a powerful hand grabbed my clothes. I felt myself violently brought to the surface, and then heard the following words spoken in my ear. If Monsieur would be so extremely kind as to lean on my shoulder, Monsieur would be able to swim much more comfortably. I seized the arm of my faithful Conseil. "You!" I said. "It's you!" "Yes," answered Conseil, awaiting Monsieur's orders. "Did the crash throw you into the water along with me?" "Not at all. But being in Monsieur's service, I followed Monsieur." This worthy fellow seemed to think this was all perfectly natural. "And the frigate?" I asked. "The frigate?" replied Conseil, rolling over on his back. "I think Monsieur would be wise not to count on that too much." "What do you mean?" "I mean that when I was getting ready to jump in the water, I heard the men at the helm shouting the propeller and the rudder are broken." "Broken?" "Yes, broken by the monster's tusk. As far as I could make out, this was the only damage sustained by the Abraham Lincoln. But what's unpleasant for us is that she no longer answers her helm." "That means we're done for." "Perhaps," Conseil answered calmly. "Nevertheless, we'll still have several hours, and one can do a lot of things in several hours." Conseil's unshakable coolness gave me courage. I was swimming more vigorously now, but I was still hampered by the clothes clinging to me like a lead cloak, and I found it very difficult to stay afloat. Conseil noticed this. "With Monsieur's permission, I will make an incision," he said. With this, he slipped a knife inside of my clothes and split them open from top to bottom with one fast sweep. Then he quickly took them off me while I swam for both of us. Then I, in turn, did the same for Conseil, and we continued to navigate next to one another. But the situation was still just as terrifying. Perhaps our disappearance had not been noticed, and even if it had, the frigate could not maneuver to leeward towards us since it had no rudder. So our only hope was lifeboats. Conseil reasoned all this out coolly and laid his plans accordingly. What an extraordinary character. This impassive fellow was acting no indifferently than if he were sitting in the living room of his house. We decided that since our only chance of rescue lay in being picked up by the lifeboats of Abraham Lincoln, we ought to manage so as to be able to wait for them as long as possible. I resolved to divide our forces so we could not both become exhausted at the same time, and this is what we decided to do. While one of us would stretch out on his back with his arms crossed and his legs extended, the other would push him forward. But this was to last no longer than 10 minutes, after which we would change roles. And alternating thus, we could remain afloat for several hours and perhaps until daybreak. Our chances seemed slim, but hope springs eternal in the human breast. Besides, there were two of us, and as improbable as it may seem, I must admit that even though I tried to destroy all illusion and give myself over to despair, I could not. The collision between the frigate and the whale had taken place at about 11 at night. I therefore estimated we would have to swim 8 hours before sunrise. This was just barely possible, taking turns as we did. The sea was calm and tired us little. Occasionally, I would try to peer through the thick darkness, which was broken only by the phosphorescence produced by our movements in the water. I would look at the luminous waves as they splashed over my head, their glistening surface broken only by pale splotches. It was as if I had dived into a bath of mercury. Toward 1 a.m, a dreadful tiredness came over me. Violent cramps seized my leg. Conseil had to hold me up, and the responsibility of keeping us alive rested with him alone. I soon heard the poor fellow panting. I realized he could not hold out much longer. "Let me go. Let me go," I said. "Abandon, monsieur? Never," he answered. "I would prefer to drown first." Just then the moon appeared over the edge of a large cloud being blown towards the east. The surface of the sea sparkled beneath its rays. The bountiful light restored our strength. I once more held up my head. I looked over every corner of the horizon. I caught sight of the frigate. She was 5 miles away, and we could make out little more than a vague shape. But there were no lifeboats. I tried to shout, even though it would have done no good at that distance. My swollen lips allowed no sound to come out. Conseil was able to articulate several words, and I heard him repeat several times, "Help! Help!" We lay still in the water for a moment and listened. It might only be a ringing in my ear, but it seemed as if I heard someone answer Conseil's shout. "Did you hear that?" I murmured. "Yes! Yes!" And Conseil gave one more desperate shout. This time there could be no doubt about it. A human voice was answering ours. Was it the voice of some other poor soul abandoned in the mid-ocean? Some other victim of the collision? Or was it a lifeboat from a frigate hailing us in the darkness? Conseil made a supreme effort, and leaning on my shoulder while I stayed afloat with the last ounce of strength, he raised himself half out of the water and then fell back exhausted. "What did you see?" "I saw," he murmured. I saw. Better not talk. Go to keep our strength. Got to keep our strength." What had he seen? Then, I don't know why, the thought of the monster crossed my mind for the first time. But what about the voice? In this day and age, there were no longer any Jonahs taking refuge in the bellies of whales. Meanwhile, Conseil was still pushing me along. He would occasionally lift up his head, look out in front, and let out a shout. He would be answered by a voice getting nearer and nearer, but I could scarcely hear it. I was at the end of my tether. My fingers became stiff. I could no longer use my hand for support. My mouth began opening convulsively and filling with salt water. A chill crept through my body. I lifted my head one last time, and then I began to sink. Just then something had knocked against me. I grabbed onto it. I felt something dragging me, bringing me back to the surface. But my chest was collapsing, and I passed out. I must have regained consciousness quickly, thanks to someone giving me a strong massage. I half opened my eyes. "Conseil?" I murmured. "Did Monsieur call for me?" replied Conseil. Just then, by the fading light of the moon sinking down toward the horizon, I made out a face which wasn't Conseil's, but which I immediately recognized. "Ned?" I cried. "Yes, it's me, still chasing my prize," answered the Canadian. "Were you thrown into the sea by collision?" "Yes, Professor, but I was a little luckier than you and was able to stand on a floating island right away." "A floating island?" "Or to put it another way, our giant narwhal." "What do you mean, Ned?" "Only I soon saw why my harpoon hadn't been able to penetrate and why it had only been blunted on its skin." "Why, Ned? Why?" "Because the critter's covered with steel plates." At this point in my story, I must gather myself together, clarify my memory, and make doubly sure of my statements. The Canadian's last words had produced a turmoil in my mind. I quickly climbed to the top of the half-submerged creature or object which was serving as our place of refuge. I felt it with my foot. It was obviously something hard and impenetrable, and not made out of the soft flesh which covers marine mammals. But this hard exterior could be no more than a bony shell like that of a prehistoric animal. And I could then easily class the monster among amphibious reptiles such as turtles or alligators. But no, the blackish back supporting me was smooth and polished rather than rough. When struck, it gave off a metallic noise. and as unbelievable as it seemed, it was made of bolted down plates. There was no longer any room for doubt. The animal, the monster, the phenomenon of nature that had intrigued the whole scientific world, confused and misled the seamen of both hemispheres, I now had to admit was something even more astounding. It was the work of a man. Had I discovered some truly fabulous mythological creature, it would not have come as great a shock to me. It was quite easy to believe that God had created something prodigious, but suddenly to find before one's very eyes the impossible realized by mysterious human means, that truly was a staggering thought. But there was no question about it. We were stretched out on the back of some sort of underwater boat, built as far as I could make out in the form of a huge steel fish. Ned Land had already made up his mind about this. Conseil and I could only agree with him. So, I said, this thing must contain some means of locomotion and a crew to guide it.
Obviously, replied the harpooner. But all the same, in the 3 hours I've spent on this floating island, it hasn't given a single sign of life.
It hasn't moved?
No, Monsieur Aronnax. Just laid here, rocked by the waves, without budging.
We know, however, and there can be no doubt about it, that it's capable of great speed. Therefore, since such a speed must be produced by an engine, and an engine requires a mechanic to run it, I conclude that we've been saved.
Said Ned Land reservedly.
Just then, as if to prove me right, there was a swirling in the water to the rear of this strange thing, undoubtedly produced by a propeller, and it began moving. We barely had time to take a good hold on its topside, which was only about 2.5 feet above water level. As long as it cruises on the surface, Ned Land murmured, we'll be all right.
But if it takes it into its head to dive, I wouldn't give $2 for my life.
He could have made the price even lower. It had therefore become urgent to communicate with whatever creatures were inside this machine. I tried to find some opening or hatch, but I could only see steel plates fastened by even, unbroken lines of bolts. Moreover, the moon then disappeared, leaving us in total darkness. We were forced to wait until daybreak to find some means of getting inside the submarine. Thus our lives depended completely on the whims of the men at the helm of this machine, and if they decided to dive, we were lost. Unless this happened, I was sure we would eventually be able to communicate with them. Moreover, unless they manufactured their own air, they were forced to return to the surface from time to time to renew their supply of oxygen. There must therefore be some opening between the inside of the submarine and the outside atmosphere. As for the hope of being saved by Commander Farragut, we had to give up all that thought of that. We were being taken off to the west, and I estimated we were traveling at the relatively moderate speed of 12 knots. The propeller was churning in the water in an absolutely regular rhythm, occasionally rising above the surface and sending columns of phosphorescent water to great heights. Toward 4 a.m, it started to go faster. We were soon traveling at headlong speed, and it became difficult to hang on with the waves crashing into us. Luckily, Ned found a large mooring ring attached to the upper part of the steel-plated back, and we were able to get a firm hold on it. Finally, this long night came to an end. My incomplete memory of it does not permit me to recount all my impressions. Only one detail comes to mind. During certain moments when the sea was calm, I occasionally thought I could hear a vague sound of music, a sort of fleeting harmony produced by far-off chords. What mystery lay behind the underwater boat, about which the entire world had been vainly seeking an explanation? What sort of creatures lived inside this strange ship? What sort of engine permitted it to travel so fast? Then dawn came. For a while we were wrapped in morning mist, but it was not long before they began breaking up. I was about to start a careful examination of the submarine's topside, which formed a kind of horizontal platform, when I felt it starting to go down little by little.
"Confound it!" cried Ned Land, striking the steel plates with his foot. "Open up! Show us a little hospitality!"
But it was difficult to make ourselves heard in the midst of the deafening beat of the propeller. Luckily, the ship stopped diving. Suddenly, there was a loud clanking noise from inside the submarine. One of the plates rose up. A man appeared, uttered a strange cry, and quickly disappeared. Several moments later, 8 solidly built young men with masked faces came silently out on the deck and brought us inside their formidable machine.
Thank you for watching.
Stay tuned for chapter 8. See you later. Make sure and hit subscribe. Thanks.